Telos had served in the Galactic Coalition for 47 cycles. He had fought beside the mighty, whose 4 arms could tear metal apart. He had planned battles with the, whose minds worked like living computers. He had watched the charge into enemy lines without a single trace of fear in their 3 hearts. He thought he had seen everything the galaxy could offer. He thought he understood courage and war and death. He was wrong. The day everything changed began simply enough. Telos stood in the command center of the Coalition flagship Eternal Vigil, watching data streams flow across his silver fingers. His species, were known throughout the galaxy for their tactical minds. They could see patterns in chaos. They could predict enemy movements before enemies knew their own plans. But they were not fighters. Evolution had given them brilliant minds and fragile bodies. When danger came, their instinct was to run, to hide, to survive and think of better solutions later. This had always made sense to Telos. Why fight when you could outthink? Why die when you could live and win another way? The door behind him opened, and 3 humans walked in. Telos had read about humans, of course. Everyone in the Coalition had. They were a young species from a small blue planet at the edge of the galaxy. They lived short lives, barely 100 cycles if they were lucky. They had no claws, no armor, no venom, no special abilities of any kind. By every measure that mattered, they were average, unremarkable, forgettable. And yet the Coalition had requested them specifically for this mission. The first human was a male in his middle years. His hair was turning gray at the sides, and his face carried lines that spoke of many battles. He wore his uniform simply, without decoration, but he walked like he owned every room he entered. This was Captain, commander of the human contingent. Behind him came a female with short dark hair and a scar that ran from her left eye down to her jaw. She said nothing. She simply looked around the room, and Telos felt something strange. It was as if she was measuring everything, calculating threats, preparing for violence at any moment. This was Lieutenant Park, their combat specialist. The third was another female, slightly older, with a warm smile that seemed out of place on a warship. She carried a plasma blade at her hip, an old model that should have been replaced years ago. She caught Telos looking at it and patted the handle fondly. "This is old friend," she said. "We have been through much together." This was Commander, their logistics officer. Telos greeted them with the formal bow. "I am Telos, tactical advisor. I have been assigned to work with your forces." Captain smiled. It was a strange expression, the did not smile. "Good to meet you, Telos. We have heard much about tactics, looking forward to working together." Over the next several days, Telos observed the humans carefully. He could not understand them. They were about to face the Hollow, the most terrible enemy the galaxy had ever known. The Hollow were nightmares given form, creatures that fused organic flesh with cold metal, that consumed entire worlds and added the screaming remains to their armies. Whole species had been wiped out by the Hollow. The Coalition had lost 17 major battles in a row. And yet the humans laughed. They gathered in their quarters and shared meals together, even though their food supplies were limited. They told stories about fallen comrades, but not sad stories. They spoke of the dead with joy, remembering funny moments, stupid mistakes, brave acts. They played games with cards and dice. They sang songs that made no sense to Telos, songs about love and loss and home. One evening, Telos found Lieutenant Park alone in the observation deck, watching the stars. "May I ask you something?" Telos said. She nodded without looking at him. "We are about to face almost certain death. The Hollow have never been defeated in a direct engagement. Our fleet is small. Our chances are poor. How can your people laugh and sing at a time like this?" Park was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to face him, and Telos saw something in her eyes that he could not name. "Because we might die tomorrow," she said simply, "so we live today." Telos did not understand, but he filed the information away for later study. The attack came 3 days later. Telos was at his station when the alarms began screaming. His fingers flew across the displays, pulling up sensor data, calculating trajectories, analyzing the enemy formation. What he saw made his blood turn cold. The intelligence reports had predicted a hollow fleet of approximately 200 vessels, standard size for a planetary assault. The coalition had assembled 150 ships to meet them, including 30 human vessels. It would be a difficult battle but winnable. The odds were acceptable. The hollow fleet that dropped out of hyperspace numbered over 600 ships. Telos felt his body begin to shake. The fear response was kicking in, flooding his system with chemicals that screamed at him to run, to hide, to escape. Around him, coalition officers of various species were having similar reactions. They were backing away from their stations. They were growling with uncertainty. Even the mighty looked afraid. Telos ran the calculations. Survival probability, 3%, and that was being generous. He turned to look at the humans. Captain stood at the center of the bridge, hands clasped behind his back, watching the enemy fleet fill the. His face was calm, completely calm, as if he was watching a sunset instead of an apocalypse. "All hands," he said, his voice steady as stone, "battle stations." Around Telos, the human crew began moving, not running away, not panicking, moving with purpose, with focus, with something that looked almost like eagerness. They checked their weapons. They secured their stations. They looked at each other and nodded, small smiles on their faces. Commander drew her plasma blade and tested its edge. Lieutenant Park cracked her knuckles, one by one. And then, impossibly, someone laughed. Telos could not tell who it was, but it spread, a ripple of dark amusement moving through the human crew. They were looking at 600 enemy ships at almost certain death, and they were laughing. "Telos," Captain said, and his voice cut through the noise like a blade. "What is our tactical recommendation?" Telos opened his mouth to say retreat, to say escape, to say anything that would get them away from this nightmare. But something stopped him. He looked at these strange, short-lived, unremarkable humans. He saw no fear in their eyes, only fire. "I am calculating options now, Captain," he heard himself say. Smiled. "Good, let's show them what we can do." The battle for 7 had begun, and Telos's education in terror was about to start. The transport ship shook violently as it entered the atmosphere of 7. Telos gripped his seat harness and tried to control his breathing. Around him sat 20 soldiers, a mixed unit of coalition species. 8 analysts like himself, 4 engineers, and 8 humans. The mission was simple in theory. A research station on the planet's surface contained critical data about hollow weaknesses. If they could retrieve it, the coalition might finally have a chance to win this war. But the hollow had already landed ground forces. The station was deep in enemy territory. Sergeant Han led the human ground team. He was young for a leader, perhaps 30 cycles by human counting, but he moved like someone who had seen 100 battles. His eyes were old in a young face. Beside him sat Private Shin, their medic. She was even younger, barely 20, with gentle hands that seemed wrong for a battlefield. The last human Telos noticed was Corporal, a large male who carried a weapon almost as big as himself. He had not stopped talking since they boarded. "You know what I hate about the Hollow," said to no one in particular. "They have no sense of humor. You try to tell them a joke, they just scream and try to eat your face. Very rude." One of the analysts looked horrified. "You have attempted communication with the Hollow." "Just once, bad idea, 0 stars, would not recommend." Grinned like he had told the funniest joke in the galaxy. The transport landed hard, and the doors flew open. Telos followed the others out into hell. 7 had been a beautiful world once. Telos had seen the old images, green forests, blue oceans, cities that touched the clouds. Now there was only ash and ruin. The sky was the color of blood, choked with smoke from fires that never stopped burning. The ground was covered with something that looked like black metal roots, spreading from hollow structures in the distance. And everywhere there were bodies. Some were colonists who had not escaped in time. Some were soldiers from earlier failed missions. Some were things that had once been both, now twisted into new hollow creatures. Telos felt his body lock up. Every instinct screamed at him to run. "Contact," Park said quietly. She had appeared beside him without sound, her weapon already raised. 12 ahead, 4 behind, moving fast. The hollow came out of the smoke like nightmares. Telos had seen images of them, but nothing prepared him for the reality. They had been humans once, or perhaps other species. Now they were something else. Metal fused with flesh, wires replacing veins, eyes that glowed with cold blue light. They moved wrong, too fast and too jagged, like broken machines trying to remember how bodies worked. And they screamed, not with anger or fear, but with something worse: hunger. The soldiers froze. All 8 of them, including Telos, simply stopped moving. Their bodies would not obey. This was the curse. Their minds were brilliant, but their bodies were cowards. The humans did not freeze. Sergeant Han moved first, pushing past the paralyzed and opening fire. His shots were precise, each one finding a hollow head or chest. "Move forward," he shouted. "Do not stop, do not think, just move." And they moved forward. Not back, not to the sides, not to cover. Forward, directly into the enemy. Telos watched in disbelief as the humans charged, laughed as his heavy weapon roared, cutting down hollow by the dozen. Shin stayed close behind, her medical kit ready, but she also carried a small pistol and used it with frightening accuracy. Park became a shadow, appearing behind hollow and eliminating them before they knew she was there. A hollow creature got close to Han. Its metal claws raked across his side, tearing through armor and flesh. Blood sprayed across the ash-covered ground. Any would have collapsed. Any would have retreated to assess the damage. Han looked down at the wound, pulled out a small tool, and burned the wound closed with a flash of heat. Telos could smell cooking flesh. The human did not even scream. He simply kept fighting. "Medic," someone shouted. 2 soldiers were down, paralyzed by fear, unable to move as hollow closed in on them. Shin was there in moments. This tiny young female threw herself between the hollow and the fallen. She shot 2 creatures in the head, then grabbed both paralyzed soldiers by their harnesses and began dragging them backward. They were each twice her size. The weight should have been impossible. She did not seem to notice. "It is okay," she said gently to the terrified. "I have you, you are safe." She was dragging 2 frozen soldiers through an active battlefield, surrounded by screaming nightmares, and she was humming. A soft tune, something that sounded like a lullaby. Her hands were covered in blood, but they did not shake. Telos found his body moving again. Not much, just small steps, but something about watching these humans had broken through his paralysis. He picked up his fallen weapon and fired at a hollow that was approaching Shin's back. The shot hit its head, and the creature fell. "Good shot," Park said as she passed him. She was bleeding from a cut on her arm, but she did not seem to notice. The battle lasted perhaps 20 minutes. It felt like 20 years. When it was over, the hollow forces were destroyed, and the research station was secure. But they were surrounded. More hollow were coming from every direction. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The transport that had brought them was a burning wreck, hit by enemy fire during the fight. "Well," said, checking his ammunition, "this is not great." Han studied the tactical display on his wrist. His wound was still bleeding through the rough seal, but he ignored it. "Extraction is not possible. Enemy numbers are too high. We are trapped." Telos ran calculations. Survival probability had dropped below 1%. There was no logical path forward. They were all going to die here. "I have a thought," said slowly. "It is a bad thought, a very stupid thought." "Tell us," Han said. "The old research station has a fusion core. Old model, very unstable. If we could get to it and make it explode, the blast would take out most of the hollow in this area. Create a big enough distraction for orbital pickup. The explosion radius would be enormous," Telos said. We would have to be very close to trigger it manually. Whoever stays behind would certainly die. Smiled. It was not a sad smile. It was not a brave smile. It was the smile of someone who had made peace with something terrible long ago. I know, he said. The other humans looked at him. Something passed between them, some understanding that Telos could not read. Let's do it, Han said. And they began to move, deeper into the nightmare, toward an explosion that would kill at least one of them. Telos followed. He did not know why. His body screamed at him to stay, to hide, to wait for death somewhere safe. But his feet kept moving, following these strange, terrifying humans into the dark. The tunnels beneath the research station were dark and cold. Water dripped from somewhere above, and the walls were covered with the black metal roots that the hollow spread wherever they went. Telos could hear things moving in the darkness, scratching, clicking, waiting. Their team had shrunk. Only 12 remained now, 4, 2, and 6 humans. The others had fallen during the push to reach the underground access point. Telos tried not to think about them. He tried not to remember the analyst who had finally overcome his paralysis, only to be pulled into the darkness by metal claws. He tried not to remember the sound she made. Sergeant Han led them through the tunnels, following old maps on his display. The fusion core was somewhere ahead, their salvation, their death. I have calculated the explosion radius, Telos said quietly. The core must be triggered manually. The person who stays behind will have approximately 4 seconds before the blast reaches them. There is no survival possibility. We know, Park said. She was walking beside him, her weapon ready, her eyes watching every shadow. I do not understand, Telos admitted. Volunteered for this. He knows he will die. Why does he not seem afraid? Park was quiet for a moment. In the dim light, Telos could see her thinking, choosing her words carefully. He is afraid, she said finally. We are all afraid. Every moment of every day we are afraid. But we have learned that fear is not the enemy. Then what is? Doing nothing, letting fear win, letting the people we love die because we were too scared to act. She looked at him directly, and Telos saw something ancient in her young eyes. Humans have a saying, courage is not the absence of fear. It is being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Telos considered this. It made no logical sense. And yet, watching these humans, he was beginning to understand that logic was not everything. They reached a junction in the tunnels. Han held up a fist, signaling stop. Ahead, they could hear movement, a lot of movement. Hollow patrol, he whispered. 20 or more, they are between us and the core. We cannot fight through that many, one of the engineers said. Not in these narrow tunnels. Then we need a distraction. Han looked at his team. I will hold this junction, draw them to me. The rest of you go around, find another path. Sergeant, that is suicide, Shin said softly. Han smiled at her. Not suicide, strategy. I can hold them for a while, long enough for you to reach the core. I will stay with you, Park said immediately. No, they need you to get through. I can do this alone. The humans argued quietly. Telos watched them, fascinated and horrified. They were arguing about who would die, not whether someone should die, but who would have the honor of sacrificing themselves. It was insane. It was the most insane thing he had ever witnessed. I have a better idea, said. He had been quiet during the walk, unusual for him. Now his voice was calm and certain. I am already staying behind to trigger the core. Let me draw the patrol too. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone, as we say. That expression is terrible, Shin said, but her voice was shaking. I know I am terrible at expressions, but I am very good at being loud and annoying, patted his heavy weapon. Let me do this. Let me mean something. There was a long silence, then Han nodded slowly. Thank you, brother, he said. Clapped him on the shoulder, then he turned to Telos. Hey, silver guy. You have been watching us this whole time, taking notes, trying to understand. Let me make it easy for you. He leaned in close. We are not special. We are not brave. We are just people who decided that some things matter more than being alive, the people we protect, the future we are fighting for, the friends standing beside us. He straightened up and grinned. That is the whole secret, pretty simple, right? Before Telos could respond, turned and walked toward the junction. He began firing his weapon and shouting, making as much noise as possible. Hey, ugly metal monsters, come and get me, I taste delicious, very nutritious. The hollow responded. Telos could hear them screeching, could hear the thunder of metal feet rushing toward the noise. His weapon roared, drowning out his continuing insults and jokes. Move, Han ordered, now. They ran through side passages while fought behind them. Telos could hear the battle fading as they got farther away. He could hear laughing between shots. They reached the fusion core room 20 minutes later. It was a massive chamber, filled with old machinery and the hum of power. The core itself sat in the center, a cylinder of barely contained energy. I will set the overload, one of the engineers said. It will take several minutes. The trigger must be pressed manually once the sequence begins. They worked quickly. Telos helped where he could, trying to ignore the sounds of distant battle, trying not to count the seconds since they had last heard his weapon. The core began to glow brighter. The overload was ready. Extraction team is in position, Park said, checking her communicator. They can pick us up at the surface access point, 2 kilometers east. Then let's go, Han said. Someone must stay to press the trigger, the reminded them. There was a crackle on the communicator. A familiar voice, weak and broken but still somehow amused. Did you miss me? Shin grabbed the communicator. You are alive. For now, I am in the maintenance shaft above the core room. Very cozy, many holes in me, cannot move much. They heard him cough. I can see the trigger from here. I can reach it. Han closed his eyes. Brother. Go take care of each other. Tell my mother I did something cool. A pause. Actually, tell her I died peacefully in my sleep. She worries. Shin was crying. Tears ran down her face, but her voice was steady. We will never forget you. Good, I am very memorable. Now get out of here. I am going to count to 500 and then I am pressing this button. 1, 2, 7, wait, that is wrong. 1, 2, 3. They ran. Telos ran with them, his legs burning, his lungs screaming. Behind them he could still hear counting on the communicator. His voice was getting weaker. 498, 499, 500. A long breath. Goodbye, friends, it was an honor. The world turned white. The explosion threw them forward, a wave of heat and force that sent them tumbling across the ground. When Telos looked back, there was nothing but fire where the research station had been. The hollow were burning, thousands of them caught in the blast. Extraction incoming, Park said. Her voice was flat, empty. 2 minutes. They waited in silence. No one spoke about what had just happened. No one spoke about the laughing man who had died so they could live. When the transport arrived, Telos climbed aboard and looked at the humans. Han was staring at nothing. Shin was still crying silently. Park sat alone, her hands shaking for the first time since Telos had met her. And yet when the pilot asked if everyone was aboard, Han answered clearly. Everyone who can be, he said. Let's go. They flew toward the fleet, toward a battle that was far from over, and Telos finally understood what it meant. Some things matter more than being alive. The eternal vigil shook as another enemy blast struck its shields. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Damage reports flooded every screen. Telos stood at his tactical station, watching the battle unfold on the holographic display, and knew they were losing. The explosion on the surface had destroyed thousands of hollow ground forces, but the fleet battle above was a disaster. The enemy had too many ships. For every hollow vessel the coalition destroyed, 3 more took its place. The defensive line was crumbling. Captain stood at the center of the command deck, calm as always. He had not sat down in 6 hours. He had not eaten. He had simply stood there, coordinating the defense, adjusting strategies, keeping his people alive for one more minute, then one more, then one more. Human vessel Brave Sun has been destroyed, an officer reported. No escape pods detected. Not at once. Note the crew in the honored log. Continue engagement. Another ship gone, another 400 humans dead. Telos felt sick. The human fleet had taken the worst of the fighting. This was by design. They had positioned themselves at the front, forming a wall between the Hollow and the coalition ships behind them. Telos had objected when he saw the formation. "This puts your vessels at extreme risk," he had told Captain before the battle. "Your ships will be destroyed first." "Yes," had replied simply. "Why would you accept this?" The captain had looked at him with those calm, ancient eyes. "Because our ships are smaller, less important. If one of ours dies so 3 of yours survive, that is a good trade." "That is not logical. Human lives have equal value to any other." Had smiled sadly. "To you, maybe. To us, every life we save is a victory. We do not count our own." Now Telos watched that philosophy in action. Human ships threw themselves into positions that guaranteed their destruction, buying time for larger vessels to retreat. Human pilots flew damaged fighters directly into hollow weapon systems, becoming living missiles. Human crews stayed at stations on burning ships, keeping weapons firing until the flames took them. "Captain," Commander reported from her station, "hollow boarding parties are approaching decks 7 through 12. Security teams are responding." "Understood. All hands prepare for close combat." Finally moved, drawing his sidearm. "Telos, take command of tactical. I am going to help repel boarders." "Captain, you should remain here. Command structure must be maintained." "My people are fighting. I will not hide." He headed for the door, then paused. "If I do not return, tell my wife I thought of her at the end." Then he was gone. The hollow boarders hit the ship like a wave of screaming metal. Telos watched through the internal cameras as they poured through breached hull sections, killing everything in their path. Coalition soldiers fell back, overwhelmed by the fury of the assault. And then the humans counterattacked. They came from everywhere. Crew members with makeshift weapons, engineers with cutting tools, cooks with kitchen knives. Anyone who could hold a weapon joined the fight. They crashed into the hollow with a violence that shocked Telos. These were not soldiers. Some of them were children barely old enough to serve, but they fought like demons. On Deck 9, Telos watched Commander hold a corridor alone. Her plasma blade sang through the air, cutting down hollow after hollow. She was wounded in a dozen places. Blood soaked her uniform, but she did not stop. "Come on," she shouted at the creatures. "Come and face me, I am not done yet." A hollow twice her size charged at her. She dove under its claws, drove her blade up through its chest, and used its falling body as a shield against the next attacker. She was laughing, actually laughing. Behind her, evacuation pods were launching, filled with wounded, filled with essential personnel. She was buying them time with her life. Captain's voice came over the communicator. He was fighting somewhere on Deck 11. "Fall back. That is an order." "Sorry, Captain, cannot hear you, bad connection." She cut down another hollow. "Get to the pods, I will hold them." "Please." "It was an honor, Captain. Out." She turned off her communicator and raised her blade. Telos watched her final stand. She killed 17 more hollow before they brought her down. And even then, even at the very end, she triggered something on her belt. A flash of light. An explosion that took her and every hollow in that corridor with her. The boarding action failed. The humans had won. But the victory outside was slipping away. Captain, Telos called over the communicator, had survived though he was wounded. The hollow mothership is charging its main weapon. Target analysis indicates 7. If it fires, the colony will be destroyed. 2 billion people on that planet. 2 billion civilians who had not yet been evacuated. Can we stop it? Asked. Telos ran the calculations. The weapon array was heavily shielded. Conventional attacks would not penetrate in time. The only option would be direct impact, multiple ships hitting the array simultaneously at full speed. It would require ramming attacks, Telos said. Many ships, many crews. There was silence on the communicator. Then spoke to the entire human fleet. All human vessels, this is Captain. You can see the situation. You know what must be done. I am not ordering this. I am asking, who will go with me? The responses came immediately. Braveheart standing by. Iron Will ready. Eternal Hope committed. One by one, every remaining human ship reported in. 31 vessels, 31 crews, thousands of people. All volunteers. It has been an honor serving with you all, Captain said. For humanity, for the coalition, for everyone we are saving today, let's fly. Telos watched the human fleet break formation and accelerate toward the mothership. They were not flying in combat patterns anymore. They were flying in a single arrowhead, pointed directly at the weapon array. The Hollow tried to stop them. Dozens of human ships exploded under the barrage of enemy fire, but the others did not slow down, did not change course. They flew through the destruction like it did not matter. Because it did not matter, not anymore. Telos, Park's voice came from beside him. She had returned to the bridge, covered in blood and ash from the boarding fight. Watch, remember, tell everyone what you see. The human ships hit the mothership like the fist of an angry god. Impact after impact after impact. Explosions blooming across the weapon array. Metal tearing. Energy discharging into space. The massive cannon that would have killed 2 billion people shattered under the force of 31 ships giving everything they had. When it was over, the weapon was destroyed. The mothership was crippled. The Hollow were retreating. The human fleet was gone. Of 31 ships that made the attack run, none survived. Park was crying silently beside Telos, not sobbing, just tears running down her face as she stared at the. Why, Telos whispered, why would they all agree to die? She looked at him with red eyes. Because 2 billion people are going to live, because their children are going to grow up, because someone had to and they decided it would be them. She wiped her face and straightened her shoulders. That is what humans do, Telos. We choose, and we accept the price. Telos looked at the debris field where the human fleet had been. Somewhere in that wreckage was Captain, who had smiled at the enemy, Commander, who had died laughing, thousands of others whose names Telos would never know. For the first time in his life, Telos felt ashamed of his own survival. And for the first time in his life, he understood what courage really meant. 1 month after the Battle of Seven, Telos stood before the Galactic Coalition Senate. The chamber was enormous, filled with representatives from over 200 species. They sat in rising tiers that stretched toward a ceiling painted with stars. Every seat was filled. Every eye was on Telos. He had been asked to give testimony about the battle, to explain what had happened, to help the coalition understand what the humans had done and why. Telos looked down at his prepared notes. He had spent weeks writing them. Pages of tactical analysis, strategic assessments, combat statistics, numbers and facts and logical conclusions. He set the notes aside. Honored representatives, he began, I came here today with a report full of numbers, ship counts, casualty figures, victory margins. I could read those numbers to you and you would understand what happened at 7. He paused. But you would not understand the truth. The Senate was silent. My species has served the coalition for 600 cycles. We are tacticians, analysts. We see patterns in chaos and find solutions where others see only problems. This has always been our pride. We are thinkers, not fighters. When danger comes, we run. We survive. We find clever answers that do not require us to bleed. Telos took a breath. I thought this made us wise. I thought species that chose to fight, that chose to die, were simply less evolved. They had not learned what we had learned. They did not understand that survival was everything. He looked around the chamber. I was wrong. He told them about the humans, about Captain, who had smiled at 600 enemy ships, about Lieutenant Park, who had taught him that courage was not the absence of fear, about Commander, who had died holding a corridor so others could escape, about Sergeant Han and Private Shin, who had dragged their terrified allies through hell without hesitation. He told them about Corporal. This man knew he was going to die, Telos said. From the moment he volunteered to trigger the fusion core, he knew there was no survival, no escape, no miracle. And do you know what he did in his final moments? He counted to 500. He made jokes. He told us to tell his mother he did something cool. Telos felt something wet on his face. He was crying. The rarely cried, but he could not stop. He was afraid. I know he was afraid. I could see it in his eyes, in the small shake of his hands. But he did not let that fear stop him. He chose something larger than his own life. He chose us. The Senate remained silent. Telos could see representatives leaning forward, hanging on his words. When the final attack came, every human ship volunteered to die. Not because they were ordered, not because they had no choice, because 2 billion people on a planet below would live if they did not. They did not know those people. They would never meet them. They chose to become fire and dust for strangers. Telos thought of Park, standing beside him on the bridge, watching her people die. She was one of the survivors now. Less than 3,000 humans remained from the original 12,000. She had lost her captain, her commander, most of her friends. And yet when Telos had found her after the battle, she had been helping with rescue operations. Not grieving, helping. Why, he had asked her, how can you keep going? She had looked at him with those ancient eyes and said, because there is still work to do. Telos shared this with the Senate. I have spent much time with the human survivors since the battle. I attended their memorial service. I expected weeping, despair, anger. Instead, I found them telling stories, laughing at memories of their fallen friends, celebrating lives instead of mourning deaths. He paused. Private Shin explained it to me. She said, we grieve by remembering who they were, not how they died. Our dead are not gone. They live in us, in the stories we tell, in the things we do because of them. Telos straightened his back. Honored representatives, I have served beside 17 species in my career. I have seen the strength of the wisdom of the fury of the. I have witnessed great courage and terrible sacrifice, but I had never known true terror until I fought beside humanity. He let the words hang in the air. Not terror of them, terror at what they willingly endure. These creatures live short lives. They have no natural weapons, no special abilities, no advantages of evolution. They are soft and fragile and easily broken. And they know this. Every human understands deep in their bones that they are small and weak and temporary. He raised his voice. And they fight anyway. They stand between the darkness and those who cannot defend themselves. They burn their brief lives like candles, giving light to others until nothing remains. They are not fearless. They are afraid every moment of every day, and they have decided that fear does not matter. Telos looked directly at the delegation. My species has spent 600 cycles running from fear. We have built our entire identity around being too smart to fight, too clever to die, too wise to sacrifice. And in one battle, watching humans give everything they had, I realized what we have lost. He turned back to the full Senate. The Hollow will return. They always return. And when they do, I want humans beside me. Not because they are the strongest. Not because they are not because they cannot feel fear. But because they have made fear irrelevant. They have discovered something that we, in all our wisdom, have missed. He spoke his final words slowly, letting each one land. There are things in this universe worth more than survival, worth more than safety, worth more than a long life spent hiding from danger. The humans understand this, and until the rest of us learn the same lesson, we will never truly win. The Senate chamber erupted in noise. Arguments, questions, demands for clarification, but Telos was already walking away. Park met him outside the chamber. Han and Shin were with her, the survivors, the ones who had to keep living with all they had lost. Park handed him a small package. "This belonged to," she said, "his unit patch. We found it in the wreckage." Telos looked at the small piece of fabric. It was burned at the edges, stained with something that might have been blood, a simple symbol, a fist holding a star. "We talked about it," Han said. "We want you to have it. He would have wanted that." "I did not earn this," Telos said. "Yes, you did," Shin smiled at him gently. "You stayed, you fought, you carried our story to the Senate. You are one of us now." Telos held the patch carefully, like it was the most precious thing in the universe. Perhaps it was. "Thank you," he whispered. Park nodded once. "See you on the next battlefield, Telos." She walked away with the others, 3 humans against a galaxy of horrors, still standing, still fighting, still choosing to be brave. Telos attached the patch to his uniform, right over his heart. He would wear it for the rest of his life, through 12 more campaigns, through victories and defeats, through moments when his body screamed at him to run and he chose to stand instead. When people asked him about it, he would tell them about a laughing human who counted to 500, about a captain who smiled at death, about a species that burned brighter than any star in the galaxy. "Fear is not a weakness to overcome," he would say. "It is a fire to forge courage." And humanity burns of all.